Hello, hello, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Reiki Cafe Radio. I'm your host for today, Isabel Wells, and I'm so excited to be bringing you guys this episode. This topic was specifically requested by some of our Soul Rising students after a conversation we had in class yesterday, and so I'm excited to be able to bring this forward here on the podcast. We've done similar topic podcasts on this before. So if you're interested in listening to more episodes like this, I'll link those in the show notes so that you can listen along after today. So, that said, I do think that this topic requires a little bit of an introduction or a disclaimer. So, today we're going to be talking about bending time, all things ranging from how time is an illusion, the importance of our intention, our role as the observer, the ties to quantum physics and relativity, and how this can work in our daily life, examples of what bending time really looks like. So, as we head into this topic, I think it's important for us to understand a couple of things. First of all, when we start talking about time or quantum physics or anything sciency, and we bring it into the realm of spirituality, there are going to be things where we have to stretch our imaginations a little bit, right? Whether we are trained scientists and we have to stretch to see the spiritual perspective, or we are spiritual seekers and we have to stretch a little bit to understand the science. So, I'm going to try my best today to bridge that gap between science and spirituality. My background in all of this is I went to school for nursing. I have a really solid background in sciences and maths, and I loved quantum physics when I was in college to the point that I spent several years reading all of the books that I possibly could on quantum physics, but also Newtonian physics. And so, as I was reading these books, as I was learning these theories, I began to see their connections to spirituality and how there are such profound similarities between the things that we're finding in science, especially in things like quantum physics, and the spirituality that we all know and love here on the podcast. And so, today I'm hoping to bring together those ties as it comes to time. And my fascination with bending time or working with time or wondering if we can manipulate time and really see that it is, in fact, an illusion started when I was an undergrad in college. I went to school for nursing, and when I found out that my curriculum did not include a physics curriculum, I decided that I would go and read physics books for fun because that's just the place that my brain is happy. And one of the books that I read was The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. If you have not read it, I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you are interested in learning more about the concept of time after listening to this podcast. It is written in layman's terms, so it's really easy to understand. He uses some amazing analogies and visual representations to help explain the reality or unreality, if you will, of time. So I started reading this book, and as I was looking at it, it really lays out in very clear terms that time is an illusion for all intents and purposes. And we'll get to that more here in a little bit. But this started my journey of wondering how far can we really stretch time? If we start to look at time as an energetic construct, as a social construct, can we learn to move within those boundaries in a more fluid way? Just like we're learning that our concepts of money or of productivity or of self worth, even, right, are constructs that may have been passed down from generation to generation to generation and aren't necessarily correct, that there's a new way of viewing reality. Can that idea extend to time? And so, Christine Renee, our lovely president and founder, was talking with our Soul Rising students jokingly yesterday about some of my crazy practices in undergrad when I was a full time honors nursing student. And for anyone who knows nursing, you know that that's not a light degree. I was studying at the University of Tennessee, which is one of the top nursing schools, I believe, in the nation. And so their course load was very, very heavy. I was taking a minimum of 21 hours a semester, which I believe a full course load is considered 15 hours, or at least it was when I was in school. And so, assuming nothing's changed, I was taking an incredibly intense course load. But on top of that, I was actually working full time. I was teaching at Reiki Cafe University when I was in my undergrad. I was running my own business, doing web design and logos and branding, which I still have. And I was working with another spiritual entrepreneur, helping her cultivate and create her business and her community. So I was working 40 plus hours a week. I think at one point I calculated it and I was working on average of 50 hours a week. And I was in nursing school with a 21-hour curriculum, including, not including, I should say, clinicals. So I also had clinicals on top of this. And I learned how to bend time to the point where I would still have time to take a nap or go for a walk or have free time or have an evening off. And at the time, one of the most common questions that I would get is, how are you doing this? And it's still something that I get today, right? And I want to put a caveat on this podcast that the purpose of this podcast is not for me to say, oh, look at how well I bend time. That's not the point. The point here is that from an objective perspective, the workload that comes to my plate and still gets done is objectively more than should be able to logically fit within the hours that we have in a day. And so this is not me saying, look how much better at bending time I am than you. That is not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, look at the potential, and here's how I have learned to bend time so that it serves me best in my own life. And let's inspire you to do the same for yours. So as we go through this podcast, as you hear me talking, please take this as an invitation to dive into your own ideas, your own life, your own ways of interacting with time so that it can serve you. Anything I say, take it if it resonates, leave it if it doesn't. This is not to say that you have to do everything like me. And this is not in any way, shape, or form to put myself on a pedestal. I don't want to be on a pedestal. I want you to be on your own pedestal. I want you to walk away from this podcast excited about how much you could accomplish, about how you can bend time, about the possibilities available to you. But I also believe that our brains function really, really well if we have examples and stories to hold on to and use as reflections of the potential available to us, which is why I'll be using my own stories and my own examples throughout this podcast. So, back to the topic. So, I had a full course load. I was working more than a full time job, and I was still able to balance it openly and flexibly. I never felt like I was stretched too thin. And this is something that I have carried through into my career. So currently, you guys know me as the director of Reiki Cafe University and the co host of Reiki Cafe Radio. But outside of this, I'm also the communications director for three different companies. I was the graphic designer, webmaster, and EPK editor of a recent documentary on homeopathy. I run my own business, one for websites, graphics, logos, that kind of thing, and one for client work, so shamanic healing, coaching, etc. So all in all, I have roughly 9 to 10 jobs right now. And we juggle them all. And one of the most commonly asked questions that I get is, how are you doing this? How are you accomplishing everything that needs to be done? How are you playing a major role in not just one, not just two, but four different companies? How is this happening? And my answer is always, again and again, I just have a weird relationship with time. And so my fiance and I were having a conversation about this the other day. He had taken me out to dinner with my friend, and my friend asked that question, how are you doing all of this? And I responded with, I just have a weird relationship with time, because she wasn't a particularly spiritually minded friend. And so I was trying to dive into this without diving in too far. And they were curious. And so I started explaining some of the things that I'm going to explain to you today. But the reason that this podcast is coming to you guys today is that Christine Renee was having a conversation about this with our Soul Rising students, and they all got so interested because I think that the idea of being able to bend time, of being able to manipulate reality, not in a negative way, right? Not in a malevolent way, but to be able to work with reality, to understand that reality is an illusion and that we can play with it however we want to really be able to step into our power and choose to have more time, choose to be able to accomplish more, choose to have more freedom. This idea of choice and freedom is really, really appealing, especially when so many of us, like we're talking about on the podcast this month, struggle with feelings of overwhelm or anxiety or stress, right? When we have so much on our plates, it can be really, really inviting to think maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe, just maybe, if I entertain the idea, I could have more time. I could get more done. I could accomplish more. I could have more freedom. I could be in flow with the universe. What if there was another way? And so that's what we're going to be talking about in today's podcast. So, of course, as always, I want to start by defining the topic that we're talking about so that we can all start on the same page. And so you might be sitting here thinking, well, that's silly. We all know what time is, right? It's that little ticking hand on the clock that tells us that our remaining time in the day is tick, tick, ticking away, that we haven't gotten things done on our to do list, that we don't have enough time, that we weren't worth enough because we didn't accomplish those things. And conversely, time can be that thing that tells you that you have 5 minutes until lunch with your best friend, that your spouse is coming home in 3 hours, that in a week you have an event that you're excited for, right? Time can be incredibly controlling and incredibly freeing. It can give us things to dread and it can give us things to look forward to. But on a scientific level, what actually is time? And so that's what I want to start by talking about today. One of the things that Carlo Rovelli talks about in his book, The Order of Time, is the fact that time is relative. And the way that we see this presented in life on Earth is that in areas with stronger gravitational pulls, time passes more slowly. So, time at the top of a mountain passes differently than time at the bottom of a mountain. Now, granted, this time change, this difference in time is incredibly small, but it's there. And what we see is that the further and further out into the universe, into the solar system we go, the more this time difference grows to the point that if we see a star exploding close to us in the universe, it'll probably take about 10 days to finish its cycle. And these facts and things that I'm citing are all coming from articles that were cited by physicists that have been scientifically backed. I'll link them all in the show notes if you want to do your own deep dive. But I'm also presenting these in layman's terms so that we can all stay on the same page. So, an exploding star close to us in the universe may take about 10 days to finish its complete explosion. But a star far away from us in the universe might take 20 to 30 days. And it's not that that star is exploding any more slowly, it's that time itself happens more slowly farther in the universe. And what we find is that if we go to something like a black hole, around the edges of a black hole, time stops existing entirely. And so time is an incredibly fluid construct to the point that there is such divide between relativity scientists and quantum physicists that they literally cannot agree about the exact state, definition, or existence of time. And what that means is that the two groups of brightest intellectual minds that we have on this planet cannot agree about something as fundamental as if time exists or not. And I find this fascinating because one of the things that we're going to talk about when it comes to bending time is the understanding that so much of this, so much of our ability to work with and play with reality is shifting our mindset around it, is opening our eyes to what exists beyond the story that we're usually told. And it begins with this understanding that at a fundamental level, we still don't know what time is. We still don't even know if time technically exists. If you take 10 physicists and you ask them to define time or tell you if time is real or an illusion, they will all have different answers. This is why things like string theory exist. It was brought into existence to try and explain the gap between the way that relativity views time and quantum physics views time. Again, this is an incredibly fascinating gap that I will link some articles to if you want to do your own reading. But I also don't want to take up too much time on it in today's podcast, getting down into the nitty-gritty science details. But what I do find interesting is that if we go even a level deeper and we say, okay, we're not sure if time is real, we're not sure if time is an illusion or not, but we do know that at some level, this construct of time exists, right? We have clocks that tell us that seconds are going by. And in fact, we have a main atomic clock that tells us the world's time. And it is to that atomic clock that all quartz clocks are calibrated, right? And so we have this, for all intents and purposes, one main clock that tells us what time it is in the world. There are a couple really interesting points about this. The first is when we dive into the actual definition of a second. And I'm asking you guys to stay with me here as we dive into the science because I promise it's going to take you on a path to breaking free of being beholden to time. So stay with me. When we look at the actual definition of a second, I'm going to read this to you so that I get it right. The second is currently defined using cesium atoms, which absorb and emit microwave radiation with a specific frequency. Atomic clocks count roughly 9 billion of those microwave oscillations, and we call the elapsed time interval a second. Or, in other words, the official measurement of the length of a second is determined by the frequency needed to make electrons jump between two specific energy levels in an atom. Frequency, in this case, as you know, refers to the number of waves that pass a particular point in space in a given unit of time. So by counting waves, it's possible to measure time. Now, that's a lot of words. And as my fiance likes to say, I don't really understand them in the order that they're in, right? So if that is you, if you're sitting here going, I am hearing those words and I don't know what she said, it's okay. We're going to dive into it. So what this is saying is that a second is defined as the time that it takes for an electron within an atom to jump from one energy level, one energy orbit, to the next energy orbit. Or it's counting the oscillations, the frequency, the time that passes to get that electron from one state to another. What this means is that when we're saying that we are counting frequency, that we're counting energy, what we're saying is that energy is time, the passing of energy, the frequency of energy. I think we're all familiar with that term because of things like Reiki. The frequency of those oscillations is what determines time. Each electron has a specific unit of time depending on the kind of atom, is a simple way of putting it. So we know that this amount of time is standardized, the amount of time that it takes an electron to go from one state of being to another state of being, for all intents and purposes. And so what this means is that we are measuring the energy that it takes for an electron to propel itself forward, which aligns with one current definition of time, which is the idea that time measures change. Time is the space between one snapshot of reality and the next snapshot of reality, wherein something has shifted. Some kind of transformation has taken place. And this is commonly explained among scientists who share this thought as the idea of if every single thing in the room around you stayed completely the same, you would not be able to tell if time had passed unless you had a clock. Now, what's fascinating about this, and what's fascinating about this idea of we are just measuring energy and calling it time, is the fact that if someone stopped counting that atomic clock, that world clock, no one on Earth would have any idea what time it is. And this is how it was phrased in an article I read that really struck me. So, in a room, the timing signal from this world clock is sent out across the United States and via satellite to other government laboratories in other parts of the world with clocks of their own. It's an impressive system, but there's a catch. You've got to keep counting. If you stop, if you blink, if that atomic clock somehow malfunctioned, you don't know the time anymore. So a physicist said, in exchange for this wonderful idea, you're now beholden to count forever and not lose track. And that in and of itself explains the fundamental shift that we need to make in our relationship with time in order to begin bending it. We have all become beholden to the clock. We have decided as a society for millennia that we have to count and count and count the passing of time in order to stay on track, in order to meet our needs, in order to meet our goals, in order to keep moving forward. We are beholden to counting the seconds that tick by on the clock. This is why we have clocks, is literally to keep track of how many times an electron could have changed state. What is also fascinating about this is that in this definition, this idea that one electron changes from one state to another as a passing of time, there's no way to actually definitively prove that the past existed. We are simply watching one electron change state, and that electron change state, and that electron change state. We have no way to prove that that electron was in a previous state. Similarly, you might be able to frame this in your mind as saying, we have no way to prove that the past existed, right? We can write something on a note card and 5 minutes later we come back and it's still on the note card, right? But we have no way to prove that that happened in the past with time. And the reason that I'm saying this is there's a theory in quantum physics that time exists on the head of a pin, meaning that because time is relative, because it's fluid, because it is just a representation of energetic fluctuation, that all of time is happening right now. The past is happening now. The future is happening now. The present is happening now. There's no differentiation in this other than the construct that our mind has decided upon. And this is another fascinating definition of time that I think ties into this. So, when you try to discuss time in the context of the universe, and I'm reading this from an article, you need the simple idea that you isolate part of the universe and call it your clock. And time evolution is only about the relationship between some part of the universe and the thing you called your clock. Meaning that we can define time by choosing something. It could be as simple as a flower, your appearance, the length of your hair, how fast your houseplant is growing, and call that our clock. Say that as this changes, I know that time is moving forward. Or for a lot of ancient civilizations, this was the sun. I see the sun moving and I'm calling it my clock. And that defined the passing of time. Our relationship to what we were doing, depending on where the sun was in the sky, became how we knew how to keep track of time. Meaning that on a fundamental psychological human level, time began as a way to coordinate society. It began as a way to say, when the sun is at this mark, we are going to do this. It was a way of coordinating, of organizing, of existing within a culture, within a civilization, within a group. It was a way of cultivating community because it allowed us to organize ourselves and make sure that we didn't miss each other, right? Make sure that we were moving forward with intention. So time began, our concept of a schedule, our concept of I need to do this at this point in the day, became as a way of setting an intention, became as a way of living intentionally, of saying, I'm going to do this at this time. Later on, we came up with the idea of the atom and the electron and all of these things, right? But these are relatively new ideas. And so when time was quote unquote created, when the construct of time was invited into society, it was made as a way of cultivating community, of living intentionally. And now that we're looking at these connections with quantum physics, the fact that time isn't real, that it's relative, that it's so illusory that even the brightest minds can't agree on a definition or even if it exists at all. And we understand that the definition of a second is just that energy is moving. We can understand that time is not at all what we thought it was, that we have created a society and a culture that is beholden to the clock. We are stuck counting down the hours, the minutes, the days, the weeks, the months, when in reality, we are only in the present. We can say that time has passed because we can look at the clock, or we can use that houseplant and say it's grown, or we can say my hair's longer than it was a month ago. And we can use these as quote unquote proofs that time has passed, that we've continued moving forward. But what we're looking at the end of the day is that there's some kind of forward momentum. And this is the one thing about time that all scientists can agree on, is that time is a reflection of forward momentum, that it has a flow to it. And if we look at this idea that time itself, for example, a second, is the movement of energy, and we understand as spiritual seekers that the universe itself is energy, that we are energy, that everything is energy. And I say to you, time can be defined as a flowing forward in energy, as the movement forward of energy. What you're probably going to hear, or what I hope you hear when I say that, is that time is just the flow of the universe. Time is just the Earth's heartbeat. Literally, it's just the Earth's heartbeat because the farther away you go, the more time dissolves. Time in and of itself is a spiritual experience. And this is where the spiritual perspective comes in. Because if we strip away gravity, if we strip away physical matter, if we strip away physical existence, and we just go back to our primary state as souls, as energy, as part of all that is, right? If we go back to that state as energy, there's no time, there's no space, there's no separation. There's no you, there's no me, there's no chair or cup or microphone, there's nothing. It all just is. And so there's no way for us to experience an emotion, to witness transformation, to understand the passing of time. If you think about all of the evolutions that you have taken to get from when you were born to who you are now, one of my favorite lines in a song is that people die 1,000 times to get to who they are, meaning that every single day you are changing and changing and changing to arrive at who you are in this moment. That evolution, that transformation, if you were still in your pure energetic state, if you were just an unembodied soul, you wouldn't be able to have experienced that. It would have happened like that. You would snap your fingers and you'd be changed. You wouldn't even be able to tell that a change had occurred because it all just is. When you take away the construct that is time and space, when you take away the physical nature of reality, there's nothing. And so, time in and of itself is a spiritual experience. And I believe it's part of why our souls choose to become embodied. Because when we step into this time space construct, when we become a physical part of reality on earth, then we can experience the process of an emotion. We can experience the transformation, the evolution of a person's personality and their being and their energy and their understanding. We can experience the fullness, the depth and breadth of a relationship from start to finish, right? We can eat a good meal. We can drink water. We can sit in the grass and watch the clouds pass. It is a construct in that at our true state, at our core, when we are energy, when we are unembodied, pure souls, time does not exist. And so we choose to come into a world where we've constructed the idea of time passing, where we have created something like gravity that allows the forward movement of energy, the forward momentum, the flow of the universe to be measured, to be witnessed, to be experienced. We choose to come into reality where that flow of the universe can be seen so that we can experience it, so that we can understand it, so that the true experience that everything is happening now, that time is on the head of a pin, that there is no past, present, or future, but there simply is, so that that reality becomes broken apart and we get to see the timeline, we get to see it stretch. And so, this is, I believe, part of why scientists have such a hard time defining reality, is because on one level of consciousness, on our human mind, mental level of consciousness, time does exist, right? You can write down something on that note card and 5 minutes later come and that note card is still there. And you can say, I wrote that in the past because I'm not doing it now. And that's true, right? We all have childhood memories. We have memories of the first time we met our spouse or the happiest day of our life, right? We have memories from the past, so we know that they happened. And so that's true. Time does exist on some level in the human reality. But when we zoom out, when we look at it from the spiritual perspective, time doesn't exist. Time is a construct. Time is something that we created to be able to experience life. And both are true. But because science deals with definitive universal answers, I believe that they are constantly going to be seeking for something broader and will be unable to accept the fact that maybe both are true. Maybe time exists and it doesn't. And this is where we go back to that spiritual idea of non duality, the yin and the yang. The light exists and the dark exists, and together they become one. And so, what this means is that we can agree, we can understand, or maybe we can just open our minds to the idea that time is just the flow of the universe. And that's what I'm going to ask you to hold on to for the rest of this podcast. Because, like I said at the beginning, I truly believe that our ability to bend and manipulate and work with time is founded on our ability to believe that it's not real. on our ability to believe that it's not what it seems, that it is on some level an illusion. And to understand that a lot of our relationship with time doesn't actually exist. If you closed your eyes and you pretended to not know anything about time, nobody had ever told you anything about time, about how it works, about what you have to do within a certain day, about how many hours there are in a day. If you did not know anything about time, and I know that's hard to imagine, but if you didn't know anything, so much of our beliefs and our stress around time would evaporate. Because instead of believing that we only have so many hours in a day, instead of believing that we have to work 8 hours a day, instead of believing that we have to get XYZ number of things done by sunset, we would just exist. We would just be. We would be present all the time. If we didn't have a concept of a clock, if we didn't know that it was 9:55 in the morning as I'm recording this, and at 12 p.m. I have a meeting, if we let our mind drop that construct of time, just like that article was saying, if we stopped counting, time stops existing. And instead, what we're witnessing is levels of change. We're witnessing an experience that then shifts and gives way to another experience that shifts and gives way to another experience. But each of those experiences is happening in the present. And this is what I'm asking you to try and cultivate as we continue to move into the second half of this podcast. What I'm asking you to try and cultivate is this understanding that time is simply a construct, and we can choose how much or how little we buy into that construct. We can choose to understand on a fundamental level that time is not what it seems. However much we understand or don't understand the science, we can understand and agree that time is just the universe's flow. Time is the passage, that snapshot of one period, a change, and the next period. And what we can understand in that is that there is no next. If we take away our concept of time, if I take away the fact that I have a meeting at 12 p.m., if I let go of that construct of time, I'm simply in the infinite present. And in this infinite present, not only do I have all the time in the world, there's no time. There's nothing for me to be stressed about or to worry about because there is no time. And I understand that you're hearing in the back of your head, but she does have a meeting at 12. If she lets go of time, what if she misses the meeting? And we'll get to that. But right now, what I'm asking you to do is just open up your mind even slightly to the idea that time isn't real. Because without that ability to open your mind, the rest of this podcast is going to do you no good. You can listen to the rest of this, and if at the fundamental level your perception of time hasn't shifted, nothing else is going to shift either. We have to be willing to believe that there is some level of magic happening. And what I love about this idea that time exists on the head of a pin, or rather that it doesn't exist from a spiritual perspective, is it's mirrored, it's mimicked in shamanic perspectives. When the shaman goes on a journey to one of the three spiritual realms, there is no time. Time passes differently there is a really common phrase that you'll hear in spiritual books describing experiences in other realms, because time doesn't exist in the spiritual realm. And so we're seeing these ideas mirrored and mimicked across science and spirituality. The other thing that's important to understand, right? Now that we've kind of opened up, hopefully, our perception of time a little bit. Hopefully, we've not gotten too confused. And the end goal here, our intention, is that we're opening up our perception of time. We're allowing our mind to be open to the idea that time isn't what it seems, that on one level, from a human perspective, it does exist. There's some concept there of the passing of time, but on a spiritual level, there is no time. When we take away physical matter, there is nothing. There's nothing. And when we understand that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, that at our core we exist, our souls exist beyond time, we can then decide that we can choose to bring that awareness, to bring that flexibility, to bring that freedom into our waking daily life. And this is where things like intention become really, really key. But before we start talking about this, I want to talk about a couple other ways that science can perceive this that align with how we're seeing it from a spiritual perspective. So, one of these is the observer effect. And I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about this before. The observer effect is this idea in quantum physics that the expectation of an experimenter, the person performing an experiment, can actually change the outcome of the experiment itself. That our minds, our consciousness have some level of control over what happens in the energy. Spiritually, this is mimicked in the idea of law of attraction, right? This idea that what we're expecting is what we create on some level. And so science and spirituality both acknowledge in different ways, but they both acknowledge that we have some control over our reality. What exactly that control is, how much control we have, it differs, but that's not what's important. What's important here is this understanding that at some level, we have some type of control or influence or connection to the nature of reality itself. And further, we also have this amazing part of our brain called our reticular activating system. And what our reticular activating system does is it takes something that you're expecting, it takes an idea that you have, an opinion that you hold, a belief that you value, and it looks for the things in your life that prove that belief, value, or opinion right. This is why if you get a new car, you start seeing that car more on the road because it is now part of your brain. It's now part of your framework for life. And so your reticular activating system is going to pick it out more and more. It's not that there's actually more of those cars on the road, it's just that you're more aware of them. Your awareness has shifted. Now, this is really important because this means that when we set our intention, right, when we set an intention about how much time we do or don't have, by using the observer effect or the law of attraction, whichever one you want to use here, we know that that intention on some level is changing reality. It is fundamentally shifting reality. This is also seen in the butterfly effect, the idea that one small action causes a sea of changes that we may or may not be aware of. So we set an intention, and that intention itself, that act of setting an intention, has fundamentally shifted reality. And we are all familiar with this because of our Reiki practice. We are all familiar with the idea that the intention is key when it comes to working with energy. And what is time? Time is energy. Therefore, our intention is key when it comes to working with time. So once we've set our intention, it's shifted reality in some way. Our mind is then going to start working on a psychological, neurological level. It's going to start working to prove that intention right. It's going to start finding all the little ways that you might not have been able to see before that are going to prove to you that you have more time than you think you do. I started being really fascinated with this idea and with this flow of working with time in this way, of using our intention to manipulate time, right? This was kind of the second stage of my evolution with time. The first was, like I was saying, shifting my perspective about what time is and what it's not, opening my mind to the idea that time's not real and getting that really installed in my brain. That kind of aha explosion moment of none of this is real if we don't choose it to be real, if we don't choose to buy into that construct. The second part of this was noticing that on any given day, whether it was during my undergraduate years when I was doing that full course load and working my full time job, or it's now when I'm working my 9 to 10 jobs, depending on the month, is that if I would wake up in the morning, it didn't matter what time I started, what time I woke up, didn't matter. If I woke up in the morning and in my head I was thinking through everything that I had to do that day, and I thought to myself, I'll probably be done around 5 today. Or, oh gosh, I have a lot to do. I probably won't get done until 8. Or now it's, oh, my fiance is going to be home at 8. I guess I'll start later and I'll be done around then. Or, I have some stuff I'd like to do before he gets home. I need to be done at 3. It did not matter how many things I had on my to do list. The intention that I set in the morning, even if it was unconscious, even if it was as simple as me going, I bet I'll be done around 5 today, that is when I would be done that day. The intention that I set created the time that I was done. And this was happening outside of a conscious experiment, right? It's not like I was sitting down yet with time and going, okay, I'm going to try and be done by 5 today and see if I can cram it all in. It was just that I started noticing that the expectation I set for myself was the expectation that I met. And this became really apparent when there would be days when I had a full course load and a full workload, but I had to be done at 2 because I had clinicals. So the more that I started noticing this, that if there was a day that I had a full to-do list, and at the time, my full to-do list looked like a minimum of 20 things to do a day. And again, this isn't an exaggeration. This is just an example. And I can post in the Reiki Cafe community Facebook group if I still have one of my old to-do lists. It was a huge to-do list. And it didn't matter if I needed to be done at 2 that day, I would get everything done at 2 today. And one of the things that my fiance tells me is how he marvels at the fact that he works an 8-hour shift, and I'll usually work around the same hours that he does. But when he comes home, I've gotten about 3 days worth of work done in that same time frame. And it's because of this idea that I started noticing that my intention about my relationship with time, my thought process about how much I could or could not get done in a certain amount of time was being proved true again and again and again. And so what I started doing is I started playing with this. And I started thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to free my mind. I'll go into my meditative state, I'll do my spiritual practice, whatever it is. I'm going to free my mind and I'm going to set the intention that I will be done at a specific time today. And I would watch and I would wait and I would see, do I finish at that time? And again and again and again, I started noticing that yes, if I set the intention that I would be done at 2, it did not matter how much I had to do. I was done at 2. One of my favorite examples of this is I had 50 pages to read in an anatomy textbook. And if you've ever tried to read an anatomy textbook, you know that they are incredibly dense and that reading a page takes a long time. And so for me, if I was at my normal reading speed, I wasn't playing with time at all. If I was going to read 50 pages to complete this assignment, it would have taken me roughly 2 hours, I would guess, given the assignments that I had to do in the time. But I had dinner that night. I had 30 minutes to read 50 pages in a textbook. And so I sat down and I can vividly remember sitting on my bedroom floor with my anatomy textbook open in front of me. And I sat back and I lifted up my hands and I was like, okay, universe, we've been playing this game called Bending Time. And it's all been fun and games until right now when I really, really need to get this done in an insane amount of time. So I'm going to intend that I will be done reading this textbook at 4:05 p.m. This was such a pivotal moment in my relationship with time that I actually remember the exact time intention that I set. I said I will be done at 4:05 p.m. I had 30 minutes. And at 4:04, I closed my textbook. And that was the moment I think where everything really, really shifted because up until that point, it had all been really theoretical, right? This idea of, oh, yeah, time is an illusion. And isn't it cool that I'm done at this time that I'm intending to be done? And isn't it funny that those are kind of coincidental and synchronistic? But that moment where I really, really used my intention to do something that was logically impossible, even though it seems so simple, right? It's just, it's quote unquote just reading an anatomy textbook. But actually fully reading, not skimming, I didn't change anything about the way that I was reading the textbook. And I still read all 50 pages in 30 minutes was insane. And it shifted everything for me. And it was at that point that I started really looking at, okay, how far can I take this? How far can I start to stretch and bend time? Because clearly, my intention is causing a difference. Clearly, when I am connected and aligned with my soul and I'm setting that intention and I'm directing the flow of energy, I'm manipulating time. Which, if we look at that definition of time as the flow of the universe, this makes sense because one of the things that we've talked about on the podcast this week is this idea of alignment and aligning ourselves to the flow of life, to the flow of universe, to the pull forward that our soul has. And this means that if we are aligning ourselves to the universe, if we are trusting in the divine, if we're following our inspiration, if we're following the flow of life, by that definition of time, we're also aligning ourselves to time. We're aligning ourselves to that potential. We're aligning ourselves to the forward momentum. And in that space, we can stretch it as much as we want to. Because time itself, like I was explaining earlier, is just the universe's energy experience stretched out so we can experience it. And if that stretching of the universe's flow happens differently at the base of a mountain than the top of a mountain, or it happens differently far away in the universe than it does close in the universe, And I know that my intention works with energy, that it shifts energy. Why can't I use that intention to stretch time a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more? And so this became a daily practice for me, and it still is. Even this morning, my fiance left for work at about 8:30, and I knew that I wanted to start recording this podcast around 9, and I had 30 minutes, and my house was a bit of a mess because I didn't clean it last night. And I was like, "Okay, I've got to fold laundry, I've got to empty the dishwasher, I've got to clean the kitchen, I've got to change the sheets, I've got to get dressed. I've got a lot to do." And so I just stood there and I set the intention that I will be done with all of this at 8:55. I'm going to stretch time. The universe is going to work with me because, again, we are divine co creators of our physical experience. I am going to work with the universe to stretch time. And I was done at 8:55 and I got my entire house clean. I used this about a month ago when my mom and I were coming back from London. We were going through customs. We had an hour to make our connecting flight. So we were flying from London into, oh, I don't remember which airport we were flying into. I think it was Chicago. And then we were flying from Chicago to Knoxville. And we had an hour, right? And anybody who's flown international and come back to the States knows that once you land in a US airport, you have to go through customs, which means that you have to wait in this long line to get your passport scanned. Then you have to go back through security. So you've gone through security once at the British airport or the international airport. And when you land in the States, you have to go through security again. At this point in time, there were about 3 other international flights that came in at the same time. So we got to customs and we were at the end of a line of, I would estimate, roughly 200 people. Maybe a little less than that, but roughly 200 people were in line to get their passport scanned. And we had to make it all the way through that customs line, get our passport scanned, then wait with all those 200 people to go through airport security in an hour. Anybody listening to this is going, there's no way. The problem is that our flight was delayed, our incoming flight. So by the time we actually got to the airport and landed, we had 45 minutes to make our connecting flight. And we got in line and we're standing there, and my mom's going, there's no way. There's no way we're going to make this connection. And I was like, Mom, just watch. Just watch. And the mantra that I told her, because I think it's so true, and again, it helps open our perception of time, is the entire world can change in a single second. All it takes is 1 minute for the entire world to change, right? I think everybody can think of a world event that shifted the entire world, or an aha moment that you had that shifted your entire life. That moment happens in a second, in a minute, in a moment. The entire world can change. If the whole world can change in a minute, we can make it through customs in 45. And I just kept repeating that mantra. And as we were going through line, I would set time expectations. Be like, in 20 minutes, we're going to be through customs. In 20 minutes, we're going to be through customs. In 20 minutes, we're going to be through customs. And sometimes the universe likes to surprise you because we got through customs in 15. And that is unheard of, I think, anyway. I was amazed. And so I was like, great, we're ahead of schedule. We have 30 minutes heading into security to make our connecting flight. And so we were in line for security, and my mom's going, there's no way. There's 200 people. They're not letting people up all at once. They're letting us go in groups. So we're having to wait in the line and feeling all this stress. And I was like, Mom, the whole world could change in a minute. We've got 30. We'll be fine. And in my head, I'm going, we're going to be out of customs in 10 minutes. We're going to be out of customs in 10 minutes. We're going to be out and through security in 10 minutes. And we were out and through security in 10 minutes. And we made our connecting flight with enough time that we sat on the plane for 10 minutes before they started doing their announcement. And to me, that is just one of those examples of how amazing our universe is, and how benevolent, I think, is the word that I would use. How benevolent our universe is in wanting to work with us. That idea, and we've all gone through this, our spiritual awakening, where we start to realize that life is happening through us, right? And to us, not at us, right? It's not, life isn't happening to us in that it's coming at us. It's happening through us, that we are life, that it's happening for us. And that idea that time works that way as well, that when we're willing to open up and step into our power and use our intention, that the universe is willing to work with us in that, is amazing. And so again and again and again, I'm seeing evidence in my own life of the fact that time isn't real, that we can use our intention to shift it, and that we can bend it as we please. And so this is where, again, there are a couple things that I want to highlight here about, all of this is great, right? I can hear somebody thinking this, all of this is great, but what do I do now? Like, good for you. You figured out how to get through customs in 25 minutes, but how does this help me? And there are a couple things. And these are what I would love for you to take away from today's podcast, the practices that I would love for you to take forward. And I know this is getting long, so I'll probably cut it soon. However, if you would like a follow up, if there are questions that you have about anything that happened in this podcast, it's a broad topic with a lot of information and a lot of inspiration, but it's also a profoundly life shifting perspective switch that we're talking about here. And so if you have questions, if you want to follow up, just let me know. But how do we apply this to our daily life? How do we apply all of this information and kind of round this out and bring it home so that it makes sense, so that it's applicable, so that we can bring it forward into our own lives? The first is working on that mindset shift. Really doing whatever it is that you need to do for yourself. Do you need more of the science? Look at those articles that I'm linking in the show notes. Do you need more of a spiritual perspective? Start playing in your own life with this idea of time. There's a fantastic book by Pam. I want to say her last name is Grout, but it's called E Squared and it's Experiments with the Universe. I'll link it in the show notes as well. And if you are just kind of butting into this awareness that reality isn't real, that we can play with reality and that our intention impacts our physical reality, check out that book. It's a series of experiments that you can do with your consciousness to prove to yourself that life works with you and works with your intention. And so, doing whatever it is for you to shift your mindset, maybe that's coming into awareness of the societal expectations that we have around time, right? That we work 8 hours a day, that we have to get XYZ done by sundown, that we have to wake up at 8 or we're not worthy human beings, or whatever it is, whatever time limitations you've come up with. And that's a fantastic journal prompt. What were you taught about time growing up? Were you raised with a scarcity mindset in time? And don't be surprised if you were, because that's the vast majority of people's experience, right? And this is where I do want to note that time can be important, right? The ability to work within time is important so that we can make our meetings, so that we can meet our friend for lunch. But we can use time in a way that it is freeing, that it is an organizational structure, that it's used like it was originally intended to cultivate community, to cultivate connections. And then when we don't need it, we let it go. But shifting your mindset, coming into an understanding that time is an illusion, that your intention can change it, and that you have the ability to stretch time as much or as little as you want to, is the fundamental shift that needs to happen. And along the way, you're going to want to be looking for what are the limiting beliefs that you have attached to time? Is your worth attached to how much you get done within a given amount of time? Is your worth attached to how busy you are within a given period of time? This is something that I see a lot from students and clients who start bending time is suddenly they have all this free time and they start to feel really unworthy because they're not busy all the time anymore, because they're not stressed all the time. And that brings up a lot of feelings of guilt or unworthiness. And so we want to work through those. We want to set ourselves free. That's the point of this. Then we can work on our affirmations, right? If this is something that works for you, we want to work on affirming these mindset switches that we're making. That I'm worthy no matter how busy I am. That time is an illusion and I can play with it. That I have all the time I need. Or my personal favorite, I have more than enough time. Or the world can change in a minute. We've got plenty of time. Finding an affirmation for you that really highlights and reminds your mind of this new perspective of seeing time, this new stream of consciousness that you're jumping into to propel yourself forward with a new idea and a new perspective of what time is. And then we want to look at playing with changing your schedule. And this could be actually shifting your day to day schedule to see how much you can get done in a short amount of time, like I used to, seeing if I could get everything done by 2 p.m. just, for kicks and giggles. This could be blocking out your time differently. So instead of saying to yourself, okay, I'm about to start this task and I'm guessing it's going to take about an hour, right? Setting that expectation of it's going to take this long. You could either not put a time constraint on it, right? If you have the freedom to say, I'm just going to work on this project and let it go, let it be and see how long it takes, you're going to give yourself the freedom to let time do what it wants. Or if you have an end goal and it's really close, you can say, okay, I need to get this done by 2 p.m. Or you could say, I have until 5 p.m. Let's see how quickly this can flow. Changing your schedule and really seeing how much you can stretch things. So if you have 5 minutes between meetings and you have a little task to get done, setting that intention of in these 5 minutes, I'm going to stretch these 5 minutes and get this task done. I have plenty of time to send this email. I have plenty of time to contact this client. I have plenty of time to place this order. Just starting to change your perspective of your schedule. And the goal here, I think, would be to be able to let go of scheduling anything that's not a meeting. So, taking everything off of your schedule, taking even your mental construct of what's on your schedule, right? So, today I have a meeting at 12, I have a client at 2:30, and I have another meeting at 4:45. Outside of those things, I have an idea of the things that I'd like to get done, but I don't have any other ideas in my mind. I don't know when I'm going to get done with work. I wasn't sure when I was gonna start work. I don't know how long it's gonna take me to edit this podcast. The only things I know for sure in using that time as it was intended, as an organizational tool, as a community cultivator, I know when my meetings are. I know when I have obligations to other souls to meet with them. And other than that, I'm gonna let the universe surprise me. I'm gonna be open to it taking as much or as little time as it needs to in the flow of life. And if I wanna play with it, then I'll say, "This is only gonna take 10 minutes. This is only gonna take 30 minutes. I'm gonna be done by 11 so that I have 30 minutes to read," whatever it is. Notice how your expectations of time in your life start to be shown, how your internal expectation of how much time you will or won't have starts to be proved in your daily life. And then start noticing how you can shift those expectations. If you're sitting there thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is gonna take me an hour," see what happens if you calm down, take a few deep breaths, align yourself, right? And that's again one of the most important parts is aligning yourself to the universe, coming into that connected state. This can't be done from a state of stress because if you're stressed, you're still attached to the idea that you don't have enough time. You have to let go of the idea of time to come into that state of alignment and freedom and presence, to be fully present, and then say, this will take 20 minutes and see what happens. Just start noticing it, start playing with it in your daily life. But coming back to rooting it all in that presence, that ability to be here. And that again ties back to that mindset shift of knowing that there is no next, there is no before, there's just now. And if we can align ourselves to that, then we can feel the call of the universe. We can feel the call of our soul. This is something that I talked about in an earlier podcast this month. This idea that the universe knows what's best for us. The universe knows what's most efficient, what's for our greatest and highest good, right? That's what we intend when we practice Reiki. May it be for the greatest and highest good. The universe knows what we need in each moment. And if we take the time to pause, to take a deep breath, to arrive in the present and to listen to our soul, to listen to the universe and ask ourselves, what is the universe flowing to me right now? Whether it is the same as what you thought was going to be on your to do list that day or it's not. Can you let the universe show you what needs to happen next? And this to me is my personal favorite practice for bending time is letting the day happen instead of making the day happen. Instead of saying I have all these things on my to-do list and they have to happen today. I have an idea of what I'd like to get done because we live in a world where that kind of organization is helpful. But my higher priority is what the universe is flowing to me, what I am feeling called to do, and trusting again that the universe knows better than my mind could what needs to happen next. The universe understands what's going to happen later in the day. And so if I can listen to that flow of what it's guiding me towards, it will lead me to being more aligned later in the day. So, for example, the other day, I was feeling really, really called in the morning to not start work. I had my to do list picked out. I had a fair amount of things to do. And I was like, the universe is just telling me to sit and to read. And then I did a little bit of school. and I did some homework. I'm in school for homeopathy right now, and so I watched a class recording and I did some homework. And I didn't start work until like 12. And it turns out that later in the day, something happened at my fiance's work and he didn't come home until late at night. And so it was okay that I worked a little later because he wasn't there either. And I couldn't have known that with my mind. But the universe knew that I would have extra time in the evening to be able to get things done. And so it let me have extra time in the morning to just be present. But if I had gone with my mind of saying, I need to get all of these things done, then I would have had a really weird, discombobulated day. Or on the flip side, when I listen to that intuition, and I think this is almost above my mindset with time. This is what I attribute my ability to get so many things done to, is the fact that I listen to what the universe tells me to do next. If I have a to-do list that day and there's something on that to-do list that the universe is like, don't do that, that my intuition is not feeling aligned to doing, I don't do it. And every single time it turns out that the project was being done by somebody else. I didn't actually need to do it. The expectations shifted, and if I had done it, I would have had to redo it anyway. When I listen to the flow of the universe, when I listen to my intuition or to my soul and what it's pulling me towards next, it always knows far greater than my mind ever could what does or does not need to be done and when it does or does not need to be done. If I let myself be in that flow, it happens exactly as it needs to. Whereas if I start to lean into my mind, I start to lean into the construct of time and a to do list, I start to pull myself out of that flow. And using our new definition of time, that means that I am actually working against time. When I am trying, when I am pushing, when I am saying this needs to happen now, when I'm saying it's going to take forever, but I have to do it, or I'm so stressed and I don't have enough time, I'm literally working against time. If I'm doing something that my soul does not feel aligned to doing in the moment, it's because I'm working against the flow of the universe, because the universe is trying to flow me and call me one way, and I'm trying to go another. And because the universe's flow is synonymous with time, that means that I'm working against myself. I'm actually shooting myself in the foot by trying to get more done. So the less that I do, the less that I try, and the more I just let things happen, the more I just let things unfold, the more you're going to get done because the universe is incredibly efficient. The universe knows exactly what needs to happen in exactly which moment. And if we can listen to that, then we're connected to that flow. We're connected to time itself. And in that space, everything is possible. But we have to let ourselves get connected and flow. And lastly, I want to put a note in here about the idea of agency and autonomy when it comes to time, because at the end of the day, we have free will, right? We have our consciousness. If you want to look at it from a psychological perspective, we have the ability to choose what we believe and what we don't believe. We have the ability to choose what happens in our day, what choices we make, how we feel. And that free will applies to our relationship with time. We can choose to step into our power and align ourselves with the potential that there's no time, that time is limitless, that time is a construct, that time is an illusion, however you want to phrase it. We can choose to align ourselves with that, or we can choose to not. And both of those choices are okay. But oftentimes, what happens is when we start thinking about stepping out of our box of time, we start to get stressed. We start to think, well, what if it doesn't work? What if life falls apart? What if I don't get things done? What if? And that fear comes up because our mind is afraid of doing things differently than we've done them before. It's afraid of being proved wrong. It's afraid of the idea that the way that we've lived life up until now might not have been the only way to do it. And so a lot of times we keep ourselves in our box. We keep ourselves moving forward unconsciously because to the mind that's easier than the idea of being proved wrong, than the idea of opening up to a new reality. And so when we choose to step into our agency and our autonomy and our power, and we understand that we have free will and we can choose to believe differently, we can choose to step into a new level of consciousness, we can choose to interact with time in a new way. When we use that power of the observer, that power of choice, that's when we truly become co creators with the universe because we are divine. We are sovereign. We do have that free will, and we're allowed to exercise it however we want to exercise it. And so the question that I'm asking you really with this podcast is, are you willing to choose to see reality differently? Are you willing to choose to let life be easier, to let life be more open? Are you willing to choose to set yourself free from constructs and limitations and boundaries and old societal stories? Are you willing to choose to step into a new level of consciousness and see things differently? And you can say yes or you can say no, and both of those are okay because you are an autonomous, sovereign, divine being that can make their own choices. But until you step into that knowledge and firmly choose for yourself, then you're still beholden to the clock. You're still beholden to society. You're still beholden to the stories that you've been unconsciously telling yourself for years. And so, my invitation to you in all of this is greater than time itself, is greater than the idea of getting more done. The invitation that I have for you is, are you willing to stop being beholden to constructs and instead be a co creator with the divine? Because it is all possible. And anything that you want to do, even the impossible, is possible. And it has been proved to me in my life again and again and again. And I would love for you to be able to prove it to yourself, but it all starts with that choice to choose to see things differently, to choose freedom, to choose to see yourself as an autonomous, sovereign, divine co creator with the universe. However, you choose to describe that state of being to yourself. So, I hope that today's podcast was enlightening, let's say. I've been liking that word lately, in that it lightened your spirit, it lightened your perspective, it lightened the constructs and limitations that we put on ourselves and opened you to a new way of being, opened you to a new idea of reality. I would love to hear your takeaways. If there's something that I didn't explain well or that's still confusing, let me know. If you want to hear more of my stories with time, I have so many. If you want to hear more of my examples or more tips and techniques on how to bend time, or there was part of this that you want some more illumination on, let me know. You can send me an email at isabel@reikicafeuniversity.com. You can send me a message on Facebook. That'll be the fastest way to get a response from me. Or you can post over in the Reiki Cafe community Facebook group, and I will respond. As you can tell, I'm incredibly passionate about this topic, and I would love to hear your takeaways, your questions, your shares, your wonderings, how you are going to experiment with time and choose to set yourself free. Because we live in a world, in a universe of limitless potential if we choose to see it that way. And if we choose to use our intention for expansion and for experience and for letting ourselves live the fullest lives we can and letting ourselves do the impossible every day, because it is possible, because we are limitless. And so, with that, I hope this podcast was everything that you dreamed of and hoped for. And I can't wait to hear your takeaways very soon. And until next time, I'll see you on Reiki Cafe Radio. Bye.